I think there's a misconception among young people that there's no need to do any form of estate planning. I mean, what estate, right? Well, as tough as it is to think about our untimely passing or incapacitation, we have to put our big girl pants on and get it done. In this episode, I'm talking with Crista Hermance, attorney and founder of the Estate Planning Mom, about what estate planning actually means and how millennials can take action today. Welcome to the City Girl Savings Podcast. I'm Raya Reeves, founder and finance coach of City Girl Savings. I turned my life around with budgeting many years ago, and now I'm on a mission to help others do the same. I fully believe that you can enjoy your life on a budget, and this weekly show will focus on the intersection of money and the City Girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Crista is a mom, attorney, and founder of the Estate Planning Mom. She lives in California with her family and works to help families make sure they're legally protected. Crista and I met on Instagram. I've been on her podcast. By the way, it's the Planning Parent Podcast, so check it out. And now she's on mine. Crista, so happy to have you. I think this is such an important conversation. Before we dive in, though, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I am an attorney licensed in California, and I started my legal career probably almost 12 years ago, working with victims of domestic violence. It got me into a courtroom. So I started law school shortly thereafter. I ended up working full-time for a law firm while I went to law school, which I think helped me pass the bar on the first time, which in California is very hard. So I was very excited once I was able to pass the bar, and I was an associate attorney at the firm I was working at. I had my daughter about a year after that, though, and I didn't want to work those crazy law firm hours. So I decided to go out on my own. I liked estate planning because I felt like it wasn't more of the conflict, which you see a lot in the courtroom TV shows. And it was more about just helping families. And as a new mom, I felt like that was so important. And so that's really what I've done over the last 7 years, is just built a practice where we are focused on planning. One side is for families with minor children, and then it's really just broadened into making sure that everyone knows how to plan, right? That legal planning is so important, and that, we can do it. And it doesn't matter the size of our estate. If we have kids, if we don't have kids, that there is some type of legal documents that need to be in place for everybody over the age of 18.
Wow, I love that. And it's crazy how everything just worked out so effortlessly, it seems, for you. How did the Estate Planning Mom come to be? Because it sounds like you've had your practice for a while, but social media, is that kind of new for you?
So it started probably about 7 years ago, right after I launched my firm. I was at a park play date with my less than 1-year-old at the time. And this mom who invited me because, my kid knows her kid. And so I get invited to the parties because of my kid. And I walk up and she's like, "Oh, you're the estate planning mom." And I was like, yes, I am. And it was so cool because at that point, she had known me through going to various moms groups and churches and speaking about planning for families with young kids. That's how she knew me. And so it was just like, that's how the brand was created. And I told her this story like years later, that she was kind of the inspiration of just how that came about. And after that, it was, full force, just using Estate Planning Mom to just really try and bring awareness to families. And Instagram, I've been doing Instagram for probably about 5 years. I can't believe it's been that long, but it's had its ups and downs, but it's a fun way to connect with people, right? And to try and make estate planning not quite so scary.
I think that's what I love the most about your page, is that you make estate planning less intimidating, but also you hone in on the important aspects of it without making anyone feel like they shouldn't be included. And I just love that about your page.
Thank you.
Yeah. So can we maybe just start with the basics? I mean, what is an estate and What does it mean for each of us?
So when we look at an estate, it's all of the stuff that you own, right? So the assets, the personal items, your couch, your car, your bedroom furniture, your bank accounts. If you own a home, retirement accounts, anything that is your asset of any time, whether it's expensive or not, it's part of your estate. And so when I refer to estate planning, it's not that, well, you need to have $1 million to have an estate plan. It's you already have an estate. It doesn't matter the size, but if something were to happen to you, how is that estate, all of your stuff, going to be distributed? What's going to happen to it? And so that's really what we talk about when we mean estate. Doesn't matter the size. Everybody's got something.
Yeah. And I think, people often assume estate means wealth, right? And
Yes.
if I'm not wealthy, I don't have an estate. But
Yes.
obviously that's not the case. And in your opinion, when should people start thinking about estate planning?
So I have this discussion a lot with parents when they have kids going off to college, right? So if you have an 18-year-old or if you are over the age of 18, you should have some legal documents in place. And so when I mean some, it's, well, if you don't own a home, do you really need a trust? And we'll talk about that, or a will. But the important documents are, if something happened to you at this age, who would you want making decisions for you? And a lot of times, especially if you're, between 18 and 22, 24, your parents are probably still pretty heavily involved in your life. Or maybe you have a significant other or a boyfriend or girlfriend or something that, you would want to be involved in decisions. You guys have been together a long time. So having an advanced healthcare directive, that's somebody where you identify to be able to make healthcare decisions on your behalf. In California, that's what we call it. Other states might refer to it as a power of attorney for healthcare. I've also heard it called a living will. These are all related to healthcare decisions, because a lot of times, especially if you're younger and you have parents that are still involved in your life, right? They're not necessarily, you're not living with them, but they're still involved. Maybe you're still on their insurance and, they're a big part of your life. You would want them making decisions for you or somebody. But without that legal documentation, parents and other family members can be completely blocked out, right? I hear horror stories from moms. They tell me these stories. My kids went off to college. One of them got hurt. I didn't have any legal documentation and they were in the hospital and I could not find out what was going on with them. And they were states away. And so you have this parent who is just, thinking the worst, just completely stressed out and not able to get any communication on their kids because it's all protected healthcare information. So that's one, is the advanced healthcare directive, the health decisions. The other is a power of attorney. And so this document, like in California, we can say, well, we would want it to, be effective if there was some type of incapacity. But some power of attorneys, they're effective immediately, depending on how you have it written or what state you're in. And so if you have your family or parents or other people in your life that you would want to be able to go to the bank or deal with your credit card companies or, help with certain financial stuff, then you might want to give them that power to be able to assist if necessary, right? Because without it, again, when somebody turns 18, they are an adult. They are their own person, and parents cannot step in and make decisions. Loved ones can't step in and make decisions. It has to be legally in writing.
Okay, let's pull the thread through just a little. So let's assume someone is 18 and, they are hurt and they're in the hospital or something happens to them. What happens if they don't have anything in place? What if they don't have the advanced healthcare directive or a power of attorney? What happens to them and their things?
Well, the way it's supposed to work with the healthcare, because it's protected, is the doctors are not supposed to, or nurses or healthcare staff are not supposed to give information. So if the person is unconscious and they cannot say, I want you to be able to talk to my mom or talk to my dad, then they shouldn't be able to. Right. And so it's, it depends on the healthcare provider. And stories that I've heard over the years, sometimes you have to go to court to be able to get that and to be able to make those decisions. I never want a family to be in that situation where there is an emergency situation and they're not able to get that information immediately. And that's why planning is so important.
Yeah. And what about, if somebody passes away young and they don't have, a power of attorney? What happens then?
Yeah, I actually have a case right now where the son was 28
Ugh.
and he passed away in an accident. And I'm helping the parents administer his estate. And like in California, and every state is going to be different. So I recommend you always find out and work with an attorney in your state on what the specifics are. But just to give you an example, California has this kind of threshold that says if you have an estate up to $184,500. I know, very random number, but that is the amount. Anything over that has to go through probate court. Okay. And so anything under that, the family, the next of kin can basically do this affidavit with whoever the assets are with to try and get access to the funds without having to go through court. Well, in this case that I have, his assets were over 184,000. And it was retirement accounts and investment accounts that he didn't have beneficiary designations listed on. And so that's what's having to go through. And the other thing that was very important to them, which I thought was so interesting, and it's huge for younger people and millennials, is the digital assets, right? The family could not access anything from the cloud to get his pictures, to be able to get his videos and all of his stuff. And the company that housed all of these documents, all of the pictures and the videos, required a court order. So that is another reason that we had to take this estate through probate so that they would get that order saying that they were in charge of the estate and they could access the cloud and all of his digital assets.
Wow. Okay. So obviously you mentioned every state is different, but, worst case scenario is if you do meet whatever your state's threshold is and you don't have a plan in place, it's a long, grueling process for those who are next to be in charge.
Yeah. It's long and it's expensive, right? I know that estate planning can be expensive. I completely understand that, but the cost of not doing it just is so much more of having to go through probate that people just don't think about the long-term effect, as well as the time, right? And just the hassle for families of having to go through it.
You made an interesting point. You mentioned that he didn't have any beneficiaries listed. So let's assume he had. It sounds like they still would have needed to go through probate, but would that have made the process any easier if a beneficiary was listed?
So when there is a beneficiary designation, it passes, whatever the asset is, passes by what we call operation of law. And so it doesn't require it to have to go through probate or through a trust if there is a specific person that it can just automatically pass to. In fact, this raises lots of points. I have so many stories from over the years, but a couple I think are very interesting just to share with you is when you have a beneficiary designation, even if you have a will or a trust that says, I want this retirement account to go to my daughter, right? If on that retirement account, the beneficiary is, let's say, an ex-wife, it's going to the ex-wife.
In any state?
Well, in California specific, right?
Okay.
But I would check because it's by operation of law, right? It's saying that if my beneficiary designation says this, it doesn't matter what the other stuff says.
Wow.
So I would, if there's any other attorneys in other states and that does not have this happen, please let me know, because I would assume it'd be very similar, right?
Yeah.
It's passing by what the beneficiary designation says, not by the will or the trust.
Ooh, I feel like that brings up a whole other topic of staying on top of your stuff, right?
It does. The beneficiary designation is huge. And I recommend annually checking your beneficiary designations on life insurance, checking accounts. If you didn't know this, you can actually have beneficiary designations on checking accounts. For whatever reason, when you open checking accounts, they don't make this very known, right? It's not like something like, oh, put this beneficiary designation. But on retirement accounts, investment accounts, anywhere you can have a beneficiary designation, if that is the strategy of your estate plan, right, is to just do beneficiary designations because that's what is best for your situation right now, make sure that it gets updated.
Yes.
So I have a very interesting, scary-ish story that I will share with you about that. And so I had a client and it was going through probate. She was the sister of the deceased, and she's gathering all of the assets, and she finds this investment account. It's got like $300,000 in it. Okay. So she goes and she takes her court order to the investment account company with the death certificate to get the assets to bring it into the probate estate so that we can distribute it as part of the probate. And what she finds out is that the money has already been taken. Her ex-husband of the deceased ex-husband of 20 years had taken her death certificate to that company and taken that money because he was still listed as the beneficiary.
Wow.
I know. And there was nothing we could do because she never updated her beneficiary designation. And what we think happened was that when she got the divorce 20 years prior, in the marital settlement agreement, right, which is the divorce order that says this is how stuff is distributed, we just think that she thought that that said it's hers, and she never updated anything from it.
But you telling me that beneficiary designation almost takes priority over the will, at least in California, but potentially in other states. I mean, I didn't know that. And that is very important to know.
And it's so easy to fix.
Yeah.
Right? Companies make it so easy to just log in and pull up the beneficiaries, having a beneficiary listed there and then a backup, right? Because so if something happens and you don't get it updated, you have somebody else listed there. I am seeing a large majority of the probate cases that I have right now, probate meaning assets that have to go through that court process to be able to be distributed to the heirs and beneficiaries through court, where the assets that are going through it are retirement accounts, life insurance, investment accounts, because they don't have any beneficiary designations for whatever reasons. They were just completely left blank. Wow. And there was nobody to distribute to.
Wow. This is a total sidebar question. I'm curious if you know, if a retirement account is passed down to someone else, how do taxes work on that? I mean, do they have to wait until they retire to get that money? Or do you get what I'm saying? Because usually if the person was still alive, they would have to wait until they retire to get the money. So does the same apply if it's passed down?
So that's a tax question for a CPA. And I'd say if you are inheriting, talk to a financial advisor, meet with a CPA to understand what are the requirements, because sometimes there are these, what we call mandatory requirements, that it's RMD. So it's requirement mandatory distributions. And it depends on the type of account, right? If it's a qualified retirement account or not, and when are the taxes going to need to be paid. So it really depends on the type of account, how much money is it going to be, are things needing to be taken out, or was it transferred to another spouse, right? So there's a lot of different kind of variables that come into it. Every situation is going to be different depending on what type of account it is and who it's going to.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sorry.
No. It just came to mind, and I was always curious about that. So I wonder if you knew. But okay. So I think, going back to misconceptions about estate planning, I think there's another one that if someone doesn't have kids, I mean, they don't think they need to plan for their passing, especially if maybe they are in their 30s or 40s. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it really depends on what assets they have, right? If they don't have children, are they married? And then how are the assets held? So if they're married, are they held jointly? Is their spouse listed as their beneficiary? Even without having a will and a trust, a lot of times, especially with younger people, is they don't think about accidents, right? They don't think about a stroke or a car accident or something that happens that puts them in an incapacitated state, meaning that they don't have the mental capacity to understand what's going on. Maybe they're in a coma, right? It's in those instances where even if you're young and you don't have kids that you have to take care of, well, who's going to take care of you, right? Who has the financial authority to go to the bank and get money to pay your hospital bills or to pay your rent or to pay your mortgage or insurance, right? So there's that aspect. And then the other side is the healthcare, right? Even not having a will or a trust, the healthcare directive is a completely separate document. I mean, when we talk about estate planning, all of these legal documents make up a full estate plan: a will, a trust, advanced healthcare directive, power of attorney, HIPAA authorization. They all make up an estate plan together. It's kind of like this umbrella. Every document does something differently. And so what your plan is, depending on your circumstances, marital status, kids, what assets you have, every situation is going to have a different plan depending on what is important to you. And so I think working with an estate planning attorney is important because then they could at least tell you what your options are. If you don't know what your options are, you're very limited on just knowing that scope of, oh, here's what I can do. Right. And it's very confusing. And so, working with somebody that understands it to say, okay, well, here's some different options for you. And then you can choose what works best for you.
So it's almost like no matter what your situation looks like, at least talk with someone to understand what's best for you right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
because especially if there's no kids, if there's a house, well, what happens to the house if something happens to you? Right. Yeah. Or what if you're hurt and the house needs to be sold, right, to take care of you? I mean, there's just so many different situations where working with a professional, I think, can at least just give you an idea of, okay, well, maybe, even if I have beneficiary designations for everything else, what happens to the house?
Right. Right. So. And I hate going down worst case scenario, but I think that's always where my mind goes. But worst case scenario, someone doesn't have kids, they don't have a spouse, their parents are passed. Then what happens to their stuff?
Yeah. So it's finding the next of kin. But who's going to do that? I had a case that called in yesterday, a potential client, and they had this friend, was a neighbor. They've been friends for 20 years. And the neighbor passed away, and they have no family, no kids, nothing. And there's nothing that they can do because they're not related. And so they're essentially just going to take the keys for the house, put them in the house, and just lock the door, because they have no authority to be able to do anything for him.
Wow.
And they have no idea who to contact.
So my assumption is that, maybe the mortgage won't be paid after a certain amount of time, and then the bank will just foreclose, and things will kind of just naturally handle themselves.
6 months, 9 months, a year and a half. I mean, however long it takes the mortgage company, if he even has a mortgage. Wow. Right? If he doesn't have a mortgage, then it's maybe property taxes. I mean, There's just so many things, and it's just, there's nothing that can be done at this point. At least the people that contacted us, and they've known him for 20 years and they don't know of any family.
So to your point, well, I guess it sounds like nothing would happen if no one takes it upon themselves to find next of kin. That just won't happen then?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's sad, right? Because if let's say you are single and independent, but you work your whole life, or you work, up until your passing, and you don't have a plan for your things, it's like all of that kind of goes down the drain.
Yes. And that's especially why I think estate planning is so important, because, maybe you do have family, but you don't like your family, right? Having a plan that says who you would actually want to be in charge and receive your stuff is important, because then it goes to people that you actually want it to go to. Right. Because without a plan, it's called intestate law, is what we call it, or intestate succession. And it's basically this hierarchy in every state. It's basically every state's estate plan when you don't have one, right? If you pass away, something happens to you, this is kind of the marching orders of who your heirs are. And so if you aren't happy with who that is, having an estate plan that says who you would want it to be is different. And it's your choice, right? You're in control.
Are you tired of wondering which moves to make next with your money? Do you need some guidance on whether to pay off debt, save, or focus on something else? Get my free Money Moves packet today and start making impactful money moves instantly. Go to citygirlsavings.com/moves to download your Money Moves packet now. I think you and I had talked about this way back when, but my father passed away without a will, and the process was just horrible. So if I've learned anything from that experience, is to not let that happen. But, most millennials don't lose their parents so early, or don't have to go through such a grueling process. So what advice would you give millennials who have no idea where to start when it comes to estate planning?
I think just being able to get some information online to learn a little bit about your state as to what is required. I know a lot of attorneys that do free consultations to at least just give you information, and that will at least just educate you, because the more that you have a better understanding, the less scary it is, right? The easier it is for you to understand what your options are and then being able to just go from there. So online research, I'd be careful asking people that don't have experience with it, because I get people all the time that say, my neighbor says I don't need this. Or they said, I don't need that. And I'm like, well, I don't know why they're saying that, because this is what it means if you don't have it, And so definitely going through some type of expert help, people that understand it and know. And then also just being careful on who you go to, right? What is it that they're trying to get from you from a service perspective, right? What's their intention? What's the underlying reason they're doing this, to make sure that it's somebody that's legit and that should be giving that information to help you.
Where would somebody go to maybe seek that help? I mean, you mentioned online, but how do you ensure that you're not meeting with someone you shouldn't be?
So I think it's great to ask for referrals from people that you know, or like Facebook groups that you're in. Another one is if you Google like attorneys near you, or like estate planning attorneys or wills or trusts, and do that internet search. It's going to come up with a lot of names. Go look at their website. Do you like what their company's about? Do they do estate planning and 12 other areas of law, right? Is it their focus? Or is it just another thing that they put on there? And then look at the reviews. I cannot tell you how many people look at Yelp reviews to find an attorney. I would have never thought that. And it's been years. I know. It's like that people actually go to Yelp to look at information, and Google, right? Google has a great review system. A lot of people put their reviews on there and see what other people are saying to know, is this somebody that is legit? Do they know what they're talking about? Is this somebody that I want to work with? So looking at reviews, I think, is another huge one.
Yeah. And I love that, because anybody can do that, right? We all know how to Google these days if we don't have access to referrals.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 terms that you mentioned are will and trust. And I think people may have an idea of what those terms mean, but I would love to hear from you what they actually mean.
Absolutely. So a will is a legal document where you give certain instructions to be carried out after you pass away. So how you want your personal property distributed, where you want your house to go, who you want to get your checking account. If you have minor children, how you want your guardians nominated for those minor children. A will, when somebody passes away, is filed upon their passing and therefore becomes a public record. So you see this on TMZ. When a celebrity passes away, TMZ is reporting what's going on with the estate, right? Whether they had a will or not. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see with wills is people will say, I have a will, so it's going to avoid probate court. Well, in California, that kind of threshold with that amount, $184,500, having a will almost guarantees probate court, because it's telling the court how to distribute the assets. It's saying here, through this probate process, this is how things are to be distributed. And that is what a will is. A will, if somebody doesn't have a will at their passing, then it passes according to the term I said before, is that intestate succession, right? It's basically your state's estate plan for you when you don't have one. And so those are the kind of the 2 areas we see where something has to go through probate court, having a will or not having a will. Where a trust comes in there's lots of different terms for a trust. So some of them being a revocable living trust, a living trust, or a trust, right? Those are the kind of 3 terms that I'm referring to, all mean the same thing.
Okay.
And what a trust is it's basically just this agreement. And it's an agreement between the grantor, which is the creator of the trust, and the trustee, the person who agrees to hold legal title to all of the assets in that trust. And the trustee follows the instructions in the trust for the benefit of your beneficiaries. And so 3 terms I kind of just threw at you there: grantor, trustee, beneficiary. Okay. While you are alive and you have a revocable living trust, you are all three of those roles, right? You're the grantor, meaning you're creating it. You are the trustee, meaning you are in charge of all of the assets in your trust. And you are also the beneficiary. The assets are there for your benefit. It's only if something were to happen to you, whether there's an incapacity, right? A stroke, a car accident, something happened, or passing, that's when your executor or successor trustee, the person that you name as your acting agent in your trust, would step in to follow the instruction for the beneficiaries that you've listed in there. So not yourself, but maybe your kids or a charity or a church or something else that you have who you would want your assets distributed for. Okay. Having a trust is meant to avoid probate court, because when you have a trust, you are funding your trust, meaning you're putting your assets in the name of your trust. If you own a home, your home is going to be titled as you, as the trustee of your trust, on the title of the house, which means if something happened to you, your trustee can then administer your trust and sell the home, or your kids can live in it, whatever your trust says. But if the home is in your personal name, then it has to go through probate court, because it then passes according to your instructions in your will.
Wow.
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned there's kind of an umbrella of documents that make up an estate plan. And you did say will and trust. So it's still wise to have both, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So in an estate plan, we look at a will, and specifically we call it a pour over will when we have a trust, just to get into it. And a trust, advanced healthcare directive, power of attorney, HIPAA authorization. Every single one of those documents make up your estate plan, but they all do something different, right? They all have their own different goal of what is to be accomplished with that document.
Okay. So help me out just a little, because let's assume I have all of my assets in a trust and I pass away. What good would the will be if everything was already in the trust?
Then it's not needed.
Okay.
It is not needed. The idea of it, and this is where the pour over will function comes in, is it says, if you have this trust and let's say you refinance your house and it gets taken out of your trust while you're doing the refinance and you forget to put it back in, the pour over will says, well, I don't want it to go through probate. I want it to go get poured over back into my trust, which would then pull it out of probate court. So that's why we have both a pour over will and a trust.
Okay, that helps. Okay, so it sounds like a trust is really the best way to go, even if maybe you just own a home or you have, assets in a savings account. It's still wise to have that trust.
I think it really depends on the state. I think it depends on what assets you have, who the beneficiaries are receiving, especially if there's minor kids involved. Are they going to be able to receive that going through court? In California, no, right? They have to get a court guardianship where somebody's going to be in charge of that money. And so why not keep it out of court and do it through a trust where you have a trustee that you've identified to manage the money on behalf of the kids? It stays protected. You make sure the kids get money at ages you set, 25, 30, 35, rather than receiving all of it when they turn 18 years old through court. And so there's a lot more privacy. There's probably a lot less in cost that's going to have to be paid going through a trust rather than going through court.
Are there companies who offer trustee services? Like, what if I didn't think anybody in my life could handle managing my trust? Like, what would I do?
Yeah, there are what we call professional fiduciaries. A lot of the professional trustee companies that you see on TV or in movies, they're for very big estates, right? These are companies that manage very high asset level clients, but there are what we call professional fiduciaries. They are licensed and bonded professionals that it is their job to just manage an estate, and it can be any size, right? Because it's just something that needs to be done. And they're just, getting paid generally hourly for the work that they do to make sure that the money's being managed the way that you have instructed it to be.
And will it ever end? Once everything's carried out in the trust, does the trustee kind of close the case and it's done, or does it stay open indefinitely?
It depends on what the trust says, right? It can't stay open indefinitely. We do have some rules against that, of course, depending on the state. And I won't get into that because it's, things for a bar exam question. But generally, it's just, what is the purpose of the trust? Right. And, I do trust administration. It's part of what we do, probate trust administration. And I have cases all the time where it's, the beneficiary is an adult child of the person that's passed away. And the whole purpose of the trust is just to pass the assets to that adult child, right? To avoid it having to go through probate, it's just going to get passed to them. So once that gets done, we fulfill all the duties of the trust, all the notices, creditor stuff, bills get paid, then it's closed, right? It ends. For some cases where there's maybe minor children, the trust may stay open depending on what the terms are. Some we actually create what we call sub-trusts, where then there's little trusts that are created off of the parent's trust for the benefit of the kids, where they get their own separate account where their money is held. They can use it for health, education, maintenance, and support. Maybe they get money at certain ages, 25, 30, 35. When's that last age that they get it and all the money is distributed to them, and then it closes, right? So it just depends on what the terms of the trust are.
Very, very interesting. Okay. What are your thoughts on life insurance as an estate plan? Again, misconceptions. Well, I have life insurance, so I don't need to do anything else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think life insurance is important, and I think it's an important part of an estate plan. I don't think it's the only thing. It also depends on the circumstances of the family, right? So if you have a single person that has life insurance, they're young, they might not have other assets. Okay, well, maybe they have their beneficiary designation on the life insurance and they have a power of attorney and advanced healthcare directive, right? Maybe that's all they need. But for some, what if the life insurance policy is to make sure that their children are taken care of? And they have minor kids and they want to make sure that, they're taken care of at least until they're through college. So I wouldn't recommend generally listing minor children as beneficiaries on a life insurance policy because, like in California, they can't actually inherit the money if they're under 18. And so, I have cases where these come in where a surviving spouse wasn't listed as the beneficiary and it's the minor kids. And so now we have to go and get a court guardianship for the surviving parent to get the life insurance company to release the funds to the parent, the surviving parent, for the benefit of the kids. And at that point, it's going to go into a court blocked account, right?
Until the kids become of age?
Yep, until they turn 18. And so the intended purpose of the life insurance policy is probably not being used for what it was intended for because the kids can't even use it to be able to take care of them or the surviving spouse. And so that's where a trust comes in, right? And so you could say, well, I have this trust, so I'm going to list the trust as a beneficiary on my life insurance policy. So if something happens to me, rather than it going directly to my minor kids, which they can't receive, it's going to go into trust. And then my executor is going to be able to follow my instructions and provide the money to my kids the way that I want them to.
Okay, that's really helpful. And, I think too, with life insurance, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say a policy pays out $250,000, but the assets of the person who passed away, or maybe I should say liabilities, are in excess of that. Would the person who received the life insurance have to cover the other person's liabilities with that money?
Generally, no, because it passes via beneficiary designation.
Okay.
Right. And so if it was going through, like if there was no beneficiary designation and it had to go through the estate, then the creditors are going to get paid because it's part of that probate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So as long as the beneficiary is listed, then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So important again to update the beneficiary designation.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think if there's any takeaway from this conversation, that is in the top few.
Go check. Yes.
Exactly. Okay. So another question for you. Let's say someone is in the process of starting a family, and I know these types of people reach out to you all the time. What guidance do you give them to ensure they're legally protected, or what are the next steps you take with them?
So we kind of just talk through where they're at in life right now. Is there an expected date of marriage? Are they already married and just newlyweds? Then making sure that, whatever their wishes are right now, we can document. If they're planning on having kids in the future, then we might put in language there that has guardians listed. That doesn't necessarily name the kids, but just says, any children that I have in the future, here's the guardians. It's important though that when you have an estate plan or when you're creating an estate plan, you're going to have to update your plan at some point, right? So it's, I generally recommend every 3 years taking a look at the plan. Are there any new children to add to it, right? We have clients all the time. They're having more kids. They need to add their kids into their plan. Or there was a divorce, right? Not necessarily of the clients, but of people they listed in their plan. And so now we need to figure out, okay, who do we list as your agents? Who do we list as guardians, right? Maybe somebody that you have listed in there has passed away or their health is in decline and they can't act in that role that you have them listed in, or they move to a different state. That's happened a lot recently. And so they need to update the plan. So it's important. Once you do it, just know it's not good forever, right? Even though it could potentially work, for a long time, it may not be your wishes in a long time, right? That the same people that are there.
You must have read my mind or saw my facial expression, because I was going to ask, how often should people be looking at their estate plan? But you recommend at least every 3 years?
Yeah. So it depends on the age, right? If it's, if they're younger and there's not a lot of changes going on every 3 to 5 years, but for some of our older clients, sometimes they're in there once a year, just checking to make sure everything is still the way that they want it. Which kids are they getting along with now? I'm just kidding. I see lots of different stuff in this area. So,
okay, trivia question for you. What if I set up my will and trust in Texas, but then I move to California and don't transfer anything, and I pass away in California? What happens?
Yeah. So it's just going to be a matter of trying to get it to work in California. We have clients all the time to move to different states. And, so long as it's, follows our, what makes a will valid in California, which in California is 2 witnesses to a signature, as long as it follows those guidelines, we can file the will with the court here. I definitely recommend anybody that's moving to another state, once they've moved, just have an attorney in your state, review the documents to make sure that they're going to work there. If anything, though, a power of attorney is going to be state specific. An advanced healthcare directive is going to be state specific. So you're going to want to make sure that that gets updated in any state that you relocate to. But I have people that are here living now and created trusts in different states, and they passed away here. So we're administering it according to their wishes.
So the state that the person passes away in is kind of the state that takes over,
as long as it's their primary residence.
Okay.
That's the big issue is that where they're residing when they passed away. So if they're just here visiting, then it would be, it would go back to Texas and be administered there. If they're just on vacation here, it's where they reside at the time of the passing.
Okay. Now, pulling the thread through again, I have a life goal to have a second home in Palm Springs, but I reside in Austin.
Yeah.
So when I have my trust, the home in California, if I pass away, I guess in Texas, everything is fine, right? Nothing happens just because that property's in California?
No, that's not right. And that's a really big misconception that a lot of people don't understand is, sometimes people will have properties all over the country.
Yeah.
And what that means is that is a separate probate in every state that a property is owned.
Even if you have a trust?
No. If you have a trust, then this is where it helps, right? Is if you have a trust, but you have to make sure that that California property gets put into the name of the trust. Okay. Otherwise, you might be doing a petition with the court to try and get it rolled over into the trust, or having to do what we call an ancillary probate in every state that has a property in it. And we do that, right? We have a lot of clients in California that have properties all over. I think we have one in Idaho and Montana and Virginia that we're working on right now. And so we just work with an attorney in that state to get it transferred into their California trust.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked that question. So glad.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Well, Crista, if you could describe the importance of estate planning into just a sentence or 2, what would you say?
I think that estate planning is your voice when you no longer have one.
Oof.
And the ability to make decisions on what you would want just goes above and beyond anything that you can expect.
Oh, powerful, powerful. Well, this conversation has been very enlightening for me, and I know so informative for the listeners. Before we wrap, though, I would love to know what's in store for you and your business and your practice and estate planning mom. Let us know.
Gosh, we have so much stuff coming up. I'm actually headed to a conference soon. I'm going to Tennessee in October to speak at a conference. I'm very excited about. I mean, we have a lot of virtual events coming up. We have a ton of in-person workshops. We're actually just prepping for a community event that we're putting together. It's called Fall into Safety. And so it's just making sure that families know how to have certain safety precautions in place for kids. And so we're planning that right now, but it just, it always seems like something's going on, always something in the works with us.
Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Finally, how and where can listeners connect with you?
I think the best place is really on Instagram. And so if you follow me at Estate Planning Mom, send me a DM. And, if you're in California and you need help with either putting an estate plan in place, or if you have somebody that has passed away and you don't know what to do, right? That is another really big one that we're helping a lot of families with right now, is just really, what are the next steps? What are your options? Because it gets so confusing on what those kind of next steps are. And people, I just find, are kind of really lost in that aspect. But if you go to estateplanningmom.com, I mean, we have attorneys all over the country that are estate planning moms that can help, right? And if you need an attorney, always feel free to send me a DM and I'll send you a list of some attorneys in your state.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I know that probably takes a lot of time. So if anybody takes you up on that, I'm thanking you in advance for that. Crista, thank you so much for being here, for having this conversation, for helping spread the word. I think it's so important. And I just appreciate what you're doing so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into City Girl Savings today. I hope you feel empowered and inspired to master your money as you make your way to your dream life. Make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when a new episode comes out. I truly value your thoughts and feedback, so please leave a review and let me know how this podcast has impacted you. Can't wait to chat soon and make it a great day.